Hello, healthcare. Everybody on LinkedIn, hello, LinkedIn, hello, YouTube. We're live and we're really excited to have another physician liaison conversation. If you follow this series, we do cover a broad breadth. Last week was finance. We talk about things in AI, about patient engagement. But the physician liaison conversations, we're always excited to have these. And we've brought some faces you might be familiar with and some people you might not have seen before. But so on our end, we have Andy Efron and Liz Biggers, who lead a lot of efforts and data-driven efforts in physician outreach relationships. And we've also brought Susan Boydell on board. If you're not familiar with Barlow McCarthy, Susan is a partner with Barlow McCarthy. So anybody who has seen Chris Barlow on any of our previous sessions, they work hand in hand in helping to manage physician liaison strategic relationships and teams, and all the way down to the training and outreach day-to-day strategy. We're really excited to talk with her because there's a lot of change right now, given the kind of new operating environment, the switch to a lot of digital, virtual conversation. So we wanted to touch on a lot of the things that were like the title of the session is should your physician liaisons be should you become a data scientist? Should you go to Stanford and get a PhD in data science? Probably not. It's not going to be a focus. So we'll answer that question early. And Susan, just wanted to give you a chance to say hello to the world.
Well, hello, everyone. I think you just gave it away, that's not quite the answer, but it's a piece of the pie. So, yeah, it's good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I gave the spoilers, but we're going to get into the details and the nitty gritty. Terry, good morning. Always great to have you on these sessions. And Jean, always happy to see you too. And thank you for participating with us a few months back. We'd love to see you again. So just getting started, it's not just the physician outreach audience here. We always have a mixture of people from whether it be population health, marketing, IT, finance, but a bunch of different departments. So we like to level set and actually get into really basic questions. So could you describe, Susan, like the basics on what the physician role is and how it's changed since the pandemic environment?
Oh, yeah. Really great question. Well, here's how I look at physician relations. It's all about liaisons represent the voice of the referring physician. Most of their focus is always on helping their organizations grow business by earning referrals from those referral sources. So how do they do that? It's all through conversations with physicians. Now, what COVID has done for us is, I would have said before, one-on-one conversations, face-to-face. Now those conversations look just like we all look right now. So we used to get in our cars and we used to drive to offices, and we're still doing some of that, but COVID has kind of pushed us to think about how we have those conversations or how we build those relationships when I can't be face-to-face. So all this technology that we're using right now to do just what we're doing, we're now using in the field. So, yeah.
And I'd love to. So Andy and Liz, with the hospitals and systems that you work with today, what are some shifts that you've been seeing or some things you've observed to that vein?
Yeah. So
yeah.
Go ahead, Andy.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing that we've seen is kind of a lot of a shift towards flexibility and being able to get out, sort of last minute communications about policy changes, being able to identify the right providers to get those out to, and being able to do that quickly. That's one thing we've seen.
So Susan, that kind of leads to another question for you. And by the way, anybody who's new to these sessions, like we have comments coming in, we have people asking questions and things like that. Feel free. This is an opportunity for you to talk directly to Susan, who's working with hundreds of teams, and Andy and Liz. So feel free to get your questions out there, and we'd love to have you be part of the conversation. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And so Susan, you had outlined changes in the way that we're conducting these conversations. We're switching more to platforms where it's face-to-face over video, that sort of scenario. So have these changes impacted the technology expectations for documenting or reporting that you see from like the PRM technology systems that outreach teams are using?
Yeah, sure. I mean, think about it. If we change what we're doing, how we do our jobs, then that changes how we document our activity and all of that. So sometimes it's just as simple as, well, now I need a drop down that says it was a virtual conversation, where before I probably wasn't paying too much attention to those, because we would say the most important was, we want you to be face to face. But when you don't have that option, then you need that piece of it. The interesting part that I think with all of it too is, I think COVID has allowed us, because we have to think differently about how we do our jobs, which means we have to track it differently. And in some ways, it might open our eyes to, maybe this isn't just something because of COVID I should continue to do. So it really allows us to look into that data and go, am I getting better results from some of these meetings that maybe were virtual? Can I get more physicians to have conversations with referring physicians, because I don't have to put them in my car, they don't have to drive as far, I don't have to try to schedule them, all those things like that. I think, let's just track that. But the only way I can do it is if I have it in my PRM tool, and I can go back to that and link it to maybe what the results are getting. So all of it's connected. Yeah, it's really important.
And would you say that like this new environment has created some new expectations? Like I feel like I got a good sense on some of the feature functionality to delineate like this type of conversation was virtual, et cetera. But I'm curious about has it changed the expectations from a reporting perspective or even results perspective as well?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, in some ways, it's exactly what I just said. It's understanding how we do our jobs different and the results that we're getting for that. I would say this is purely a COVID piece of it that Liz sort of brought it up in terms of what the teams have had to do and what they're focused on through all of this craziness. And we're back in a surge again. So the teams are right back at it. So, I mean, volume is always going to be important, but voice of customer right now is probably really risen to the top. And I would say the field teams have been really, really an important piece of that, especially with those independent physicians that perhaps just don't have those internal connections and communication connections that, say, our employed groups do, or even those that are a part of our network. But we rely on those referrals from those independent physicians. So it's being able to then, how do I document that? And then how do I report that back to my leadership team that gives them an idea of what's really going on out there? This is a simple story that probably everyone on the phone is going to go, yep, been there. If volume wasn't hitting the expectation we thought it was going to hit once we reopened up our elective surgeries, sometimes the answer to that question was, well, my patients are still not comfortable going in the office. So we're out talking to physicians, and we get to learn that piece of information that not only tells us, well, do we need to dig a little bit deeper? Do we need to provide those offices some communication to help their patients feel more comfortable? Maybe not so much with their offices, but with the hospital. So all of that somehow has to sit somewhere, and I need to be able to package that up to report that back. So still important. Yep.
Excellent. So a lot of what you said actually tied into a question that we got from the audience from Shantae Ramsey over at Multicare, which is, should we be sharing hospital visitor policy changes with referring providers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to guess that if any liaison asks their offices if this was important for them, would this be helpful for your patients? First of all, they'll tell you. But I bet the answer is yes, because they need to understand that. And think about this. It's an avenue in which your internal folks can get a message out to those patients. So there's the mass way of doing that, okay? But then there's this direct way where I'm going to go directly to those offices that I have relationships with, and I'm going to provide them tools and communication that's specific for their patients. You can't get any closer to having it work from that perspective. So that's a great question and a great thing to do.
Thank you. And getting into it, like actually getting closer to the topic at hand. So one change that has been happening, and this has been, COVID-19 didn't start this. This is a transition that's been happening since before COVID, but it is about the role of data in the physician outreach repertoire. So how would you describe the role of data in that physician liaison relationship?
Well, you said it. It's not COVID that caused this. It's been there for a while. Data is more important than it ever was before. And here's the great thing about why data is more important than it ever was before, because we have more. That doesn't mean we know what to do with it and all of those pieces, but we have more data that helps us figure out what we need to be doing and what works out there in the field. I'm old, so I can tell you that when I started out in physician relations, there was no data. So that's why we put liaisons in the field, to go figure out who's referring to whom and what do those relationships look like. Nobody told me that in a report. We had to go out, ask the questions, and we had Excel spreadsheets that showed us what those connections are. We now have data that sets that up for us. It tells us the what's happening on there. Teams always have to go out and figure out the why it's happening. And I would say that's one of their most important pieces of it. But I really think we've been probably talking about this for several years now. And I think if we want to say COVID did shine a light, it did do this. It is a little like the title. You do need to be more of a data scientist than you used to be. It's not all up to, oh, I need my strategy folks or my data analysts within my strategy team or my decision support team to feed it to me. Not so much. I got to be able to analyze it. And here's why I'll say why we need to be able to analyze it. I want teams to be able to look at it and analyze what they're going to do with it from a referring physician perspective. You could probably sit in any strategy department and there's a million different ways they're going to take the same data and slice it, dice it, depending on what they're trying to do or understand. It's the same for us. And we're usually the ones in the organization that understand that best and can provide that intelligence back after you look at it. What's the story that the data is telling you? I would say what COVID gave us was a little bit of a reprieve in the early days. So I think about when we were all pulled out of the field in March, and most of us were out of the field. Most folks were out of the field until probably May. And teams were like, okay, what am I going to do? How do I rethink my time? And almost everybody said, let's do some of this data work and some of this sales planning work through the data that perhaps we just never had the time to do before. And so I think it really opened a lot of eyes. I think it also helped teams create what that process was, or even determine, oh, my team needs a little more training or a little more education on how to use the data. And this allowed them to look at that and say, oh, let's help them with this piece. Let's help them understand this piece better, so that as they move through the data scientist piece, they get better at it. But no matter what, it's still a balance. So just like you gave away, Chris, at the very beginning, I mean, this is not about spending the majority of your time with your nose in the data. You still need to spend the majority of your time having conversations with those physicians. But can you be smarter about it because of the data? Absolutely. Yeah.
So at the beginning of the conversation, I said, should should outreach specialists be data scientists? I said, no, but you've corrected me. It should be no asterisk, but.
Yeah. It's a little bit, and we've probably all seen it. I mean, I'd probably ask Liz and Andy or anybody that's tuned in here to say, yeah, I'm smarter now because of the data, and I'm smarter because I figured it out versus somebody feeding it to me. And I think there's a lot to that out there that we've seen that will continue to grow, which is good.
Yeah, and one of the things just to build on that, one of the things we see a lot with our clients is they love the fact that we take all that data and we bring it together in one place. So when someone is going out for one of those meetings or preparing for one of those meetings, all the data they need is directly in that provider's profile, and they're not having to go out and pull a little data from here and pull a little data from here and a little data from here and then try to aggregate it all. We bring it together just in one place, so when you're ready to go, you can see everything at once.
And I like the way you illustrated that point too, because if you are in a series, like if there is more data available, but it's in a ton of different places, a ton of different spreadsheets, where you have to make a request to an IT department, and then it takes a month or so to get that data, then those become challenges that the outreach teams hopefully wouldn't have to deal with. So we had a couple of questions that could delve a little bit deeper down the data hole, but I saw a good comment from Shantae again, that policies are changing so fast that we don't want to give the impression that we're disjointed. That's so when we talk to people in outreach and engagement, especially like if we look at what what the leading medical opinions on masks were early into the pandemic versus a little bit later, when there became more acceptance, and then it became kind of like a thing that people thought should be required. Susan, what's your concept on that? Like, as policies are changing, as things are shifting quickly, how do you maintain that professional decorum? Like, what's the response to that?
Well, it's a really, really good question. And in some ways, it's probably an expectation out there that just because we were just talking before we started this about sometimes you just got to turn the news off. But it's a really good question. Here's where I would start with this. Again, you're putting on the hat of the referring physician. That's what you're representing back to your organization. I would want for my organization to provide me with the messaging for what your organization wants those physicians to hear or understand. You're providing back to those leadership folks or those communication folks, whether or not that's going to resonate, be relevant, et cetera, to those referring physicians. Sometimes that means you're going to ask them and bring that intelligence back. And sometimes it might mean, just to get to the heart of this, sometimes it means you just have to tell them, I know things are changing really, really quickly, and have a reason for explaining why that's happening. And we all know what that is. There's probably not an office out there that doesn't get that piece. What you're probably going to hear back, and I'm guessing many of you probably heard back in the very early days, and maybe hearing it some more too, is just the frustration that those offices are feeling. And that's what you want to take back to your leadership team and help them. You're a resource for that, for how you can help those offices with that frustration that they're feeling. And how you need to package that message. That message might be you having conversations directly with those offices. It might be how we send out communication via email and other sources, so that people have access to that, whether it's town halls, whether it's whatever those things are. But if you provide the voice of customer back, if you have good communication people, they'll figure out how to package all that, and you get to then provide the piece that say, this is working, this is not. So not a direct answer, but a really good question. I think a lot of teams are facing it every day, probably.
Yeah, Susan, you brought up a good point that kind of rounds it back to something that you said earlier, which was at the beginning of these relationships, at the beginning of these engagements, there wasn't any data. There wasn't any way to understand that voice of customer that now there are teams of people interacting with, taking notes on every day. So could you talk, like, I would say that kind of mileage varies when it comes to the feedback loop from the physician liaison team back to leadership, and then the decision process. So I'm curious if you have some good examples to share, or some good ways that feedback that the physician outreach team has been getting in the market. What are some good examples of how that's made it back to leadership to result in better decisions from learning about that voice of customer?
Yeah, I mean, it's here's the first thing that comes to mind. It's how we package that up and how we provide context to it. I'm going to use an example that probably every liaison on this session right here will go, yep, been there. It's thinking the same way as when we talk about issues and barriers. If I talk about every single issue and barrier as a one-off, even though I've had multiple physicians or I've had multiple offices talk about it, but I talk about each one of those independently, they don't get the picture of the whole thing. It's really a little the same in from this perspective too. How many offices did you speak to that were frustrated by the fact that I'm going to use an early one, that they had no PPE and where could they get it? That was the early one, was can the hospital provide me PPE? And we heard from so many liaisons, like, we're not able to do that. How do I communicate that piece? And how many offices are asking for that, et cetera? It's probably the same thing. And I used the example earlier with the patients that are still not comfortable with either going into a doctor's office, whether it's going in to get an imaging procedure or it's going into the hospital in general. If I've talked to 20 offices and 18 of those offices said, yes, my patients, or the majority of my patients have expressed this, think of the power of that versus every day I said, oh man, we're just getting hit up because the patients aren't comfortable coming in. What's the patients? So it's really getting into quantifying some of that. And sometimes then I would say add a story. If you can talk about, I had this conversation in Dr. X's office. Here's the words he used to express what he was feeling and what he was going through. I want my leadership team to feel the same thing I felt when I was standing either in front of or on a Zoom call or on the phone. I want them to hear it in the same way. And that's my job when the leadership team can't be sitting there with us. So
that's a great way to illustrate it, is that it's more than, so when you start seeing that trend and you start tracking it, then the extra mile to getting that communication back is not just, here's a chart that shows the number of offices or locations out in this way, but making it more real by telling a story that connects the data that was collected to the action or outcome that's needed.
Yeah, I mean, here I'll give you one example. This was early in COVID, so it might not be as relevant today, but maybe, okay, because we might have crises again, folks. There was a team that at the end of every day summed up what the liaisons were hearing from the physicians in the field related to the COVID stuff. So it went to leadership at the end of every single day. It wasn't 2 pages worth of stuff. It was several bullets. So think about the power of rolling that up and saying, here's the top 3 things we were hearing from physicians. Now, I'm going to give you 2 things with it. One is, it's great intelligence for your leadership team and the decisions they need to make to know what's going on out there. The second is, think what that leadership thought about the value of that team. Every day, at the end of every day, they sent something up and said, here's what we're hearing. Now, does it need to be every day right now? Probably not. But how we might do, so think about, when's the right time that I need to make sure something gets in front of them right now? And then how do I do that on a more consistent basis, which might be monthly, it might be weekly, that sort of thing. But the power to me was in the moment. That's what that team needed.
So this is this comes in related, and I was curious about Andy and Liz, your perspective on this as well, definitely. But when we when there's more information learned about the voice of customer, curious about how quickly leadership teams and how quickly organizations are able to flex and adapt to those changes, and perhaps what are some of the challenges in getting them to adapt to those changes that they see.
Well, I think it definitely goes back to, at least from my experience, it goes back to what Susan mentioned, which is being able to quantify what those issues are. It's hard to really influence within your organization if you can't quantify what you're hearing. And this is kind of an interesting aspect of data, actually. We talked earlier about the data that you need when you're going out to meet with providers and understand what's happening in the providers world based on historical data. But it also helps to be able to quantify what you're hearing in your conversations. And one of the ways we've supported that is to build custom data collection forms for clients to collect data around these issues. So if there are problem issues, complaints in clinics and healthcare institutions, we've given people the ability to collect that information in a structured way so that they can then create dashboards to share that data internally with their leadership, and they're using that to influence upward in their organizations. And I think they're seeing that as helping them flex and be more nimble because they're able to make decisions based on hard data rather than just anecdotal evidence or impressions.
And Susan, same question, and especially thank you for your input, Andy. Where does that, where would you stand on that concept?
Well, here's my top of mind right here. Okay, we're salespeople. If I need my leadership team to do something that I know is going to help the organization, it's my job to figure out how to present that to get them to take action. And so sometimes that's easier than said than done, which we all know that. And oftentimes I'll say, just don't keep hitting your head against the wall. If the way you're communicating something right now isn't resonating, change it up because you haven't got to it yet. But I'm a true believer that it's our job to figure out how to package that up so it resonates with whoever the customer is internally. A finance person is going to look at it very different than a COO is going to look at it, than a service line leader is going to look at it. So know your customer internally, and then you package the message to work for them.
And I think one thing to add too is, like you were mentioning before, Susan, with that daily feedback on, here's how folks are feeling today, here's what we've done today, making sure that you have those relationships with leadership set up so it's not, they don't hear from you for 2 months and then, you have some big thing that you want to bring them, kind of making sure those communication pathways are open all along.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to earn that internally. We absolutely have to earn it. And you hope you have it before the crisis comes in play, because it's harder. But it teaches us something. So in some ways, for teams that maybe it wasn't as strong as they always hoped it would be, or didn't, or what they wanted it to be, COVID sometimes can allow that to happen. Because think of just like we were talking about, that intelligence that you're going to bring back from the field, you're probably in some ways the only ones that can provide that.
Very important point. And Liz, I think that the power in your answer too is that you highlighted kind of a way you do business permanently. So it's not the concept of we're going to come into a leadership meeting with a chart based on some metrics and some statistics that nobody had ever agreed upon or seen before, and then they have to process it right then and there. It's more about having a partnership where you're agreeing on metrics and identifying potential value points or challenge points ahead of time, and then collaborating, like Andy, to your point, on like a dashboard, something that's online, and collecting data and calibrating based on what's happening in the market. So we have time for just a couple more questions, so get that last minute one in if you can. But Susan, of course, we play heavily in the technology space. I would argue that folks like Liz and Andy are folks that really make it happen and make it real, and there's technology that they use to help them do that. But I'm curious, just from your perspective, having worked with so many organizations, what are if organizations are looking for the right kind of tech to make this happen, what are some things that they should be focusing on from like that PRM provider partnership?
You kind of said the word right there. It's a partnership. I think it's so important because so much of the PRM piece of it, the data and all of that is so integral, which is what we just talked about, into how we do our jobs and to the effectiveness of how we do our jobs. So I need you to partner with me and be a part of what my team does and how my team does it. I would say some flexibility. I'm thinking we're beginning to see some of that. That as teams evolve and try to move through and advance where they're going, we'll just use the data side of it when we were talking about. If I need to help teach my team how to use the data better, there's no better partner than my PRM partner to help me do that. And I would say probably the last thing is honesty. That what it's going to take to do it, how long it's going to take to put everything together. Here's what some of the pitfalls might be, but here's how we can get around those pitfalls. I think that probably honesty and flexibility go right with a really strong partnership to begin with. So, yeah.
Great. Excellent points to emphasize, and Andy, I think that people would see that as a conflict of interest. But so we'll finish off with probably one of the harder questions, Susan. But again, seeing that you've worked with so many teams and seen so many departments and relationships, some successful, probably some that were less so. But what would you say is the difference between strong leadership and weak leadership when it comes to physician outreach?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good one. Probably what first comes to mind for me is really strong program leaders are driving performance and driving results. They are not solving problems. And I think sometimes that we can get stuck in all the things that aren't working and how all that works. And as leaders, we sort of want to pave that or get that out of the way for our teams. And I think, though we have to do some of that, driving performance is a big piece of it. I would also say this is just good management in general. So I wouldn't even say it's specific to physician relations, but it works. Is just really good, clear expectations and realistic goals and how we hold teams accountable. Probably the word there is accountable. And which goes right to driving performance. When I think of really good managers, they hired really good people and they trained really good people and they onboarded really good people. And then they worked with them from a team perspective to be successful in the role. And that goes really back to performance. So if I were to add one more thing to it, I would say they're just really good coaches. And again, it all goes to that performance feed. I mean, I want to motivate them. I want people to feel great about the team they belong to. I want them to feel great about the organization they're working with, even when things are broken and don't work the way we want them to. I want them to feel good about the impact they're making on the organization as a leader. That's my job. Even when things aren't going well, that's my job. So hope that helps.
Yeah, helps tremendously. And we're closing out. We're getting to the end of the hour. But I just around from everybody, I just wanted to hear any final thoughts. Like I know that there's a reason everybody came to have this conversation. So if there's anything that Susan, Andy, Liz, that you'd want people to take away from having this experience and thinking through these challenges, what would that be? We'll start with Susan.
Well, here's be mine. Take this opportunity right now to challenge the status quo. You probably heard it one too many times. I'm going to sound probably like a broken record, and I'm not the only one that's saying this, but forget going back to what was the way it was before. I think there's so much great learning in here. And when you think of healthcare in general, this has challenged everything that we've done, which means our whole organizations are looking at different ways to do things. And if we as physician relations are not doing the same, then we're missing out, because right now it's an expectation in an organization, and take advantage of it. Because in all honesty, you can fail right now, but you tried. So what we learn from what we try makes us better. So yes, challenging the status quo.
And Liz?
Yeah, I loved what Susan was saying about accountability. And so I think just one thing to add to that is, setting those expectations, having visibility into performance, and using that as a way to make sure that you're able to bubble up the contributions of your team and summarize all the great things they're doing to leadership. So.
And final thoughts from you, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, COVID is one of those things where you're tempted to just say, oh, another thing. But I think, every challenge can be viewed as an opportunity. You can say, hey, the world has changed. Good. This gives us a chance to, learn how to be more flexible. Good. This gives us an opportunity to change up the way we're doing things and learn how to be better at remote meetings. Good. This gives us another opportunity to figure out ways to leverage our data. So there's always opportunities. You got to look for the positive side and things, and look for that opportunity to grow your skill set, expand your relationships with providers, grow that level of trust, and demonstrate your value within your organization.
Thanks, and what a great way of thinking in terms of, hey, let's whatever situation that we have, be it COVID-19 or be it like stuff in our personal lives, let's find out what the opportunity is from that and build from there. So again, appreciate everybody coming in. Shantae, thank you. Paula, thank you for your questions. Drew, Jesse, always great to see you. Jean, we miss you. We'd love to have you back. Terry, thank you. Next week, being Thanksgiving, we're taking a break, so you're not going to see our Health AI University series or our LinkedIn Live session. I mean, I'm sure that would lead to a lot of conflict around the turkey table. But we'll be back on our LinkedIn Live session. Next time, we'll be discussing Patient 360 Experience with Walter Grozewski. And again, we have another ongoing video series where if you're kind of assaulted by these buzzwords around AI and machine learning and everything around that, there's a series that we're running called Health AI University. And what that is a explanation of the stuff that's happening, the different things that are available, these technologies. But when are they actually useful? When do they apply in healthcare? What can you expect in terms of how they influence patient behaviors and ultimately outcomes? Those are the kinds of things that we address specifically when it comes to AI and machine learning, so that healthcare leaders can look at that stuff and be able to make sound decisions from it rather than being lured in by, well, we got to look in this AI thing. We got to figure that out. So join us for that on the Thursday coming back from the break. And again, if there's anybody who has any questions or you'd like to reach out or get in touch, LinkedIn is an easy place to reach us all. Thank you very much, and see you after the holidays.